It was an indictment of conservative principles of free market capitalism. And this was supposed to be sort of like the reductio ad absurdum of free market capitalism, was a guy like Gordon Gekko getting up and telling stockholders, greed's good, greed clarifies, greed succeeds, that sort of thing. It's a big, long speech. So we got a taste of that. If you're more than a taste, we got a double helping full of that during the last presidential election when Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee, and people were going on and on about the car elevator in his garage in his Southern California home. I think it's outside of San Diego, and Romney's dressage with the horses. The DNC actually ran ads about the horse dressage during the summer of 2012, when they were just absolutely burying Mitt Romney in all these negative ads. And so you've always had this kind of class warfare thing coming from the Democrats until the Clintons made $30 million over the last 4 years giving speeches and to politically connected corporations and politically connected banks in places like Russia and Saudi Arabia and all these various different entities that normally Democrats rail against, the oppressive regimes and the international banking cartels and Wall Street players and that sort of thing. All of a sudden, this is all good. And Matt Bai wrote a piece, and I think it was for New York Magazine. I'm trying to remember right now because I didn't look at it today. But he wrote a piece about this, about, well, why do we want a president that's just like one of us? And he was comparing, the Clintons to Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, both of whom are fairly modest means. In fact, Scott Walker is actually, I think they released his net worth as something like $72,000, which is, I'm actually doing better than Scott Walker is. But, he's been a public servant since he was, a county executive, and then he moved up to the governor's mansion. This is not a guy who's making a lot of money off of politics. He's also supporting his elderly parents, too, so that eats into the net worth thing. And Marco Rubio, I think, is around $200,000. Both men of modest middle-class means. So now the meme is, well, we don't want a president who's just like us. We want somebody who's comfortable with, their earning potential. The only really downside, Matt Bai argued, was that they just maybe are a little too acquisitive because they're compensating for this lifestyle that they'd like to have. Well, if they've made $30 million off of just giving speeches in the last 3 or 4 years, I think they've compensated enough. I mean, this is a couple whose net worth right now is estimated to be in the 9 figures, very low 9 figures. But, if it's 9 figures, very low is not much of a qualifier. I mean, we're talking over $100 million of net worth. And that's the estimate anyway. But they've certainly made about $150 million that we know about over the last 15 years or so, from book deals, from speeches, from consultancies that Bill Clinton has tried to more or less mask by using a pass-through entity for the payments. That's something that came out this week. And so all of a sudden, all these things, and the pass-through entity, by the way, is offshore, which Mitt Romney had as well in 2012, and Democrats absolutely ripped him for it. The Cayman Islands thing where he had a pass-through entity, I think it was about $2 million in capital gains that went through the pass-through entity. Nobody knows how much is passed through. Bill Clinton's passed through, of course. But all of a sudden, these things are no big deal anymore. We don't want a president of modest means. We want somebody who's aspirational. Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed clarifies if you're a Democrat in 2016.